are here for the second edition of our weekly talk show, the Friday Flash Forward. How you doing, Cal?
Yeah, I'm not doing too badly. Reese, how are you going?
I'm fantastic. Happy Australia Day, such as it is for the celebration. To you and to all our Oceanic viewers, well, mostly just Australia Day. I guess New Zealanders aren't going to celebrate Australia Day, are they?
Probably not. You really hope not.
Well, they will when we annex them. It's happening. We just got to work out how to only annex the bits related to the Lord of the Rings, and they can keep the rest because the rest of it.
Might even take the OPL players for good measure.
Oh yeah, or even just Lost and Chippies. The rest will pass. No, just kidding. That's a bit of unnecessary flame. So interesting first week of OPL action. There was a really interesting match to kick things off, and a couple of one-sided matches. And how did you see it all shaking out?
Relatively uneventful week for the most part. Most of the results went as expected. Outside of the Chiefs-Direwolves matchup, where I think a lot of people actually tipped the Chiefs to take that one, because obviously Schoenfire is on a current suspension until week 3, and Pralis was filling in, and Pralis had a standout performance, didn't he?
He really did. It's interesting you use the word tip. I mean, this is going to be a bit cheeky of me to bring this up, but the tipping numbers were actually overwhelmingly in the Direwolves' favour, although I did see a bit of, I don't want to call it smart money because they lost, but I saw a lot of tipster and analytical / pundit viewpoint was really leaning towards the Chiefs win in this one. But as I said, I'm just bringing up the good old OPL Tips website. Make sure you get your tips in for a chance at some sweet hungry Jack versions. But if memory serves, the tipping was like 70+% in fact. Let me have a look. It was 67% Direwolves favoured tipping, so that was an interesting stat. But yeah, getting back to your point about Pralis, he really played well. I thought certainly above and beyond my expectations, and arguably showed himself to be an OPL standard jungler. What do you think about that?
I think it may be a little bit too soon to say he's definitely OPL standard, and that's purely due to the fact that he was playing Shyvana and playing it with the Direwolves, which basically allows for a dynamic where he is allowed to, for the most part, freely invade and play the style necessary for Shyvana. And I also think that Chiefs showed some unfamiliarity around how Shyvana works, what her clear speed is, how quickly she can move around the map, etc. So I might be a little bit too early to say yes, he is definitely of OPL caliber, but either way, he really did have a standout performance, and I want to say he was the MVP for the Direwolves.
I think so. So earlier, I think it was yesterday or last night on Snowball, we had former Sin Gaming coach Bensel chip in with his MVPs in the week, and he actually gave it to Chippies, which kind of leads a little bit into a point I wanted to bring up about this series. So what did you make of Chippy's performance?
I think Chippies basically performed how you'd expect him to perform. Chippies is obviously, don't think anyone can really argue this point now. He's our premier top laner, he's our number one. The only real case you can say, he has a little bit of a lacking performance on the tanks, but as a carry player, he's exceptional. And he really did back up all his performances from last year.
For sure. So hang on a minute, sorry, I'm just getting invites to league matches distracting me. Stupid PC making noises. So the one thing that I thought was about this series that really was unfortunate in its timing was that I thought Swiper was not too bad at all in the first match of this season. Kind of, particularly I thought his Maokai was quite good, at least in team fighting. Went a long way to sort of showing the Armored Titan performances that you'd expect from him, and by his own admission, he had a bit of a stinker in Game 3. So do you think that Chippy's performance, in particular insofar as Game 3, was an indicator of his performance, or Swiper having a bit of a miss in Game 3?
I think any time you're seeing Chippies in the top lane, you can basically put it down to, one, his performance, but obviously players are going to obviously have some tilt, there's going to be some, maybe they have an off game, but I think obviously with Chippies, first and foremost, you put it down to his performance before you ever blame his opponents. He's just that good of a player for our region.
Okay, and there was a bit of consternation earlier in the week, shall we say, there were some opinions, particularly from our fellow writer here at Snowball, Andrew, held quite a strong opinion that this was not a good loss for the Chiefs at all, and even despite their own competitive ruling issues, but to not take the series against Direwolves with their own roster changes that they were forced to make. How do you see all that? Do you think that this was a particularly bad loss for the Chiefs, or do you think that this was just everyone sort of throwing the results from weeks 1 and 2 in the bin for those teams who have competitive rulings, and it's not really indicative of anyone's true form?
I think the biggest problem if you're Chiefs is you have to factor in that this is your only match against the Direwolves, and this can potentially be what the difference is between you coming first place and you coming in second place. And if you're to factor that in, then you've got a massive differential, because obviously if you come first place, you get the free buy into the grand final, and that's a big deal, isn't it?
For sure. So it's the proverbial 6-point match, and if there's only going to be one of them, that's a really big differential in points. I hadn't actually taken into account the full fixtures, so I didn't realise that they were that was the only time they met. It's a bit weird. Like last year, they had intra-group, cross-group, intra-group matches, and this last week seemed to all be cross-group matches. So it's interesting how they've done the fixtures like that. So,
I didn't notice that, to be honest.
Well, I was talking about it with in Pabu's chat when Pabu was streaming earlier in the week, and apparently that's their only match against the Bombers. And he was a bit sad that they couldn't get a chance to test their mettle against obviously the import squad is the one that's now looking like the most likely of I shouldn't say most likely, the one with the most growth room out of the 3 teams that aren't looking playoff bound. They've got probably the biggest potential to upset one of those 5 teams. And so if that does happen to come to pass, Avant aren't going to get a chance to get another crack at them. They're only going to get the sub squad. So it's interesting. Yeah, so there's at least 2 cross conference, so to speak, cross group matches in week 1, which makes me assume that all of them are. But like I said, I haven't gone and had a full in-depth look at every single week of the roster to work out whether or not you had 4 cross group matches or 2 and 2. So the standout was that you had in that match was Prayless was the one who, for your money, went above and beyond their performance the most. Is there anyone else who you wanted to tip your cap to in that match, or have we covered the standout performers from that series for your money?
I think you can definitely give a tip to Destiny. I think he performed how you expect. I think at this point, if it's not a playmaking meta, which it isn't at the moment, then Destiny is by far and above every other support in the region. Excuse my English. And he basically came out with another performance that you'd expect from him, and if he keeps at that level, I don't think anyone's going to be contesting him for a little while.
For sure. So for my money, if we look at the rest of last week, just quickly to wrap it up, most of the other matches went pretty much as was expected. I'm going to try and walk that in, despite the fact that I publicly and brazenly tipped Sin to beat Legacy, and that very much didn't happen last week. So that notwithstanding, everything else went about as expected. Avant sort of rolled over the Bombers' sub-squad order, took care of Tectonic despite the heroic efforts of a Renegade Urgot. And yes, as I said, Sinwar accounted for Legacy in a very strong performing raid. But the one person I really wanted to tip my cap to, despite the losing effort, was the performance of Bombers' 80 carry Tiger. He was, despite being obviously two starting members missing, just walking off a plane, there's no way you're not at least a little bit still jet lagged. I thought he was really, really excellent. We were talking a little bit before the show went live, and you pointed out how good his wave manipulation was, and how it really gave probably Bombers the best / arguably only chance to do anything against Avant, in putting up some strong numbers against Blinky, who is obviously an OPL veteran, and Tiger coming into his first Premier League of any description. Premier League with OPL, some people outside Oceania might say your mileage may vary, but it is still a world's qualifying league, and it's a level of competition and stakes that Tiger's not used to, and I thought he acquitted himself very, very well. What did you make of Tiger's performance?
I think Tiger, considering that he'd just come off the plane the day before, albeit at not a pleasant hour, he really did have a standout performance considering everything that he's had to go through. You also have to consider that he had just come off the plane. He hasn't been able to get any scrim time with the team either, so there was no pre-built synergy between him and Rosie. And to be able to go against, like, I'd like to call Jake and Blinky the baseline for OPL bottom lanes. If you're better than them, then you're in the top. If you're worse than them, then you're in the bottom of the league. They really are the benchmark, and Tiger, all considering, standout performance, good wave manipulation, good team fighting. Really can't fault him.
Okay, and I'm having a quick look at some match history pages. He was how was he? So he's actually out farming Blinky in game 1, which is a little bit misleading because they took, I think, a couple of min hits before that match was over. Yeah, they got their top.
I believe so.
Yeah, they got top and mid, so they're pushing super wave minions in super wave minions. Nice work, mate. Super minion waves into the Nexus, so it does sort of tend to inflate farming numbers, but the gold advantage that he's getting. This is not doing what I thought it would do. If I knew it would do this, I would have been prepared. He's on par with Blinky right up until the game blows out, right around the 20-minute mark. So that's a really strong performance again from a player who was not in. No, there's no way he was in peak physical condition. There's no other way to say it. So yeah, like I said, and like you just said as well, like really impressive performance by Tiger. Hopefully, with a week to sort of settle into life down under and a week with Rosie, we'll get an even better performance out of him. So, sorry.
Just on that point, this week after being able to obviously establish a little bit of synergy with Rosie, going into next week they're versing Order, so they're versing FBI and Rogue, and this will be the real test to see how Tiger proves himself to be an AD carry in the OPL. Don't you agree?
100%. Like, FBI was. This is actually something I was going to bring up later, but now I thought FBI was the best player in Order by a considerable distance. You obviously put big raps on him in your roster reaction to that roster lineup, to that Order lineup. So yeah, this is a fantastic test for Tiger, and it'll be really tantalizing one for bot lane fans like myself, and hopefully some others to get their hands on moving forward, or moving at least I should say into next week, and to really see what he's made out of.
Certainly agree with that.
So what I wanted to move into next is is just sort of looking at a couple of things from one of them we just covered off, which was FBI's performance. So we spotlighted a couple of the Premier 80 carries who are going to be meeting up, and we'll come back to that in just a moment as well. But you wanted to talk about the way that the OS meta is shaping up through. To be fair, it's only early days, only 1 week, but there's a really interesting nugget of information that's showing itself through the early picks and ban trends of the OPL. So what have you found for us?
So what we are seeing inside the top lane is we are seeing that Ornn is having 100% presence, and 88% of that is in the bans. What's interesting about that is when we start to compare with the international meta, obviously you're going to have a larger sample size, few unique picks here and there from obvious regions, and the big difference here is we're seeing a 33% ban rate for Ornn internationally. What this leads me to believe is that in Oceania we aren't exactly confident to be able to play around the pick, whether it be we're not able to punish the pick like you should be able to do it in the early game. If you're able to target him and take out his sustain, obviously because his sustain is gold dependent, he builds his items and that's how he gains his sustain. Or it's due to the fact that we're not confident in our split pushing ability, because obviously we look at the meta and we see things like Nah, Camille, even the Gangplank. And like all three of these champions within the meta all serve a similar kind of purpose against the on pick, where they either have a split push presence or they are able to basically just stay in the lane, take a little bullying, and then come out ahead of him later. But the thing with that is, if you're not able to punish the pick, and you're not able to execute upon the weaker Ornn, then Ornn will come back and he will dominate the team fights with his team fight ultimate. Unless, obviously, Brom is taken. Thankfully, they've significantly increased the cooldown for future patches.
So, if I understood correctly from something I think I read on either on a Twitter post or heard the stream earlier in the week, that's in week 3 that we'll see that change. So obviously not this week because the patch only came out this week, but I think we can expect to see that next week.
Should be next week. Should be for week 3.
Week 3, yeah. So all the OPL players are coming back at the same time. Ornn might be leaving a little bit. Now, the interesting thing that I just got from what you were saying then about the 3 picks, so you're highlighting Gnar, Camille, and third one was Gangplank as picks that do well. Was that you were saying into the Ornn?
They do well into the Ornn, correct.
Yeah. So those are 3 picks we actually saw a bit of. We saw Gnar and Gangplank 3 times each and Camille twice. So if we're picking the picks that are good into it, do you have any theories as to why we're banning? Is it just the lack of comfort that you mentioned before, or is there another thing you think there might be, or is it actually just a comfort thing?
I suspect it's overall a lack of comfort around how to play around the pick, because while I think Ornn is obviously a really strong champion in his own right, I just personally believe that if you're able to target the pick, then you're able to basically make him as useless as a Tahm Kench is in the top lane, and that's not very useful.
Hey man, I got some elo in Season 5 off Tahm Kench top lane, thanks to Chippies, so you settled down in that flame. No, the other thing that I was just looking at from the banning is that Camille and Gangplank are both nearly 100% presence combined. Only Camille's the only pick that's fallen through all the way once. So we are seeing a bit of it. The thing that I'm just thinking now, that again from what you've just said, is that you're saying that people aren't targeting it. Do you think that's a comment on the nature of roster construction as to why they might not be willing? They're just banning it altogether rather than letting it through and targeting it. Because Oceania's like now seeing when Mimic comes in, there'll be 4 different top lane imports across 3 different teams. Obviously, Sin imported twice. Sleeping for Bombers and Mimic for Legacy. So top lane has been highlighted as an area of weakness, and until Papyrus came in this year, there wasn't really much cause for excitement beyond the big 3. Like, we weren't sure if Pabu was going to live up to the promise, and we're still not. He had a good start to this year. We'll see how he goes moving forward. But do you think that it might just be a thing like we're not prepared to invest those resources into our top lane?
I personally don't think that's the issue. I think in Oceania, our top lane has always typically been comfortable more so on the carry champions. Obviously, that is the nature of solo queue. If you're going to climb that ladder, you're probably going to be resorting to carries. Very few cases see if you're looking at the top 10, very few of those cases will you see a tank main in the top lane.
Right.
Like, if we look at the players that have come through the OPL, we're looking at Chippies when he was making his rise, he was known as a carry. Pabu, known as a carry. What's his name again? Praedyth.
Papyrus? Oh, Praedyth, yep.
Praedyth, known as a carry. Papyrus, known as a carry. Series, when he came into the OPL, even he was more so known for carry play. To a lesser extent, the Malphite. Spoiler alert.
Oh, so that Malphite pick is that actually a secret series pocket pick that we just hadn't seen until last week?
He has definitely played it in solo queue in the past. I know that much.
So the Ornn's probably you're thinking that teams are investing too much brand priority into the Ornn because they're not comfortable playing around how to exploit the pick. Is basically what we're saying.
Exactly.
Do you think that, like, obviously Bombers didn't have their full squad. Between the competitive rulings, we've got, was that 3 top lane bans? Or was it 2?
Oh.
Mimic, Sleeping, and I feel like there's one more, although maybe I'm making that up. I think it's just 2.
I think it's just 2. I think it's just Sleeping and Mimic.
So do you think it's a case of just teams like not getting to see it in scrimmers because they don't know how to play it and they're not prepared to learn? or is it just like we've had a couple of players sitting out, so the strategies they might normally use to play it around it, the sub-top laners are not current on or not familiar with? Do you think that's something that we'll start to see moving forward, or do you think that there might be a lack of adaptation here in the OPL and we'll see it as a more or less permaban?
I think what the OPL shows frequently is that anytime we move to a new patch, that we're typically 1 week behind the other regions. Obviously, we do lack being able to talk to other regions, play on other regions. We don't have the best geographic location, as we're surrounded by water, unfortunately. God bless Australia.
Surrounded by water and not internet cables. Anyway, not the point.
But because of that, anytime we have to interpret the meta by ourselves for the most part, and obviously when we're interpreting the meta for our own selves, we're only going to be limited in what we can do. And obviously we see that, and obviously, for example, in Korea, we won't typically see Zoe picked or banned. A lot of the time Zoe will get through the bans, where in other regions you'll see Zoe get picked up, pick or ban a lot of the time. That's just an easy example to throw out there, as I have been watching quite a bit of the LCK.
Yeah, I've seen a bit of Zoe around it. It's interesting in that sense. Whereas we only saw it, I think it was once, on Swiffer picked it up once and was the only player who got to play it.
I believe it was picked once and banned 5 times for an overall 68%, 68% present? 67%.
2/3. Yeah, so it's just do you think it's just a case of we'll see that once the other teams are letting it through and what teams are picking into it, that we'll start to see those numbers sort of flip around a bit, less banned, more picked, or possibly even let through from time to time. Probably not though. It's still really strong. At least for this week for sure, because they're still on the old cooldown. So moving on now from the Ornn Priority, so we're looking forward to next week. We're just going to do a quick whip round of a couple of matches that interest you. Now there's one pretty obvious one standing out on the docket here. So what have you got for us on this? What's the most interesting match? The match of the week for this week.
I don't think you can go past Chiefs vs AV. I think that considering that we're having the clash of 2 quite young rosters for the most part, obviously Chiefs having brought in Barbip, having Ryoma, and Destiny, while a veteran, he's still quite young for...
Yeah, for sure.
Unfortunately, Raze isn't playing. Otherwise, it really would have been one of the youngest rosters to be able to really contest for an OPL title.
Yeah.
And with AV, we're having Pabu only, Frey, and obviously Blinky and Jake. And it really is just going to be a good clash. I think with AV's performance last week, showing a strong sense of macro, being able to play particularly well around Pabu. Whereas I think Chiefs are a little bit shaky. They don't seem to have truly kind of gelled as a roster just yet. So it should be a good contest.
For sure. Now, the one thing everything you said is of course accurate, but there is one thing I think that's sort of a mitigating factor that might. I actually have a fairly strong opinion on this. I shouldn't say strong opinion, that's the wrong way to word it. I'm pretty convinced of something, but it's on shaky ground, so I'm standing confidently on a house of cards on my take on this match, is probably the best way to put it. Quality of competition, I think, was a really big thing surrounding these 2 teams and their performances last week. Obviously Chiefs were playing Direwolves, pretty strong chance to make them to be the best team in the split, or in the region I should say, and Avant played the Bombers, who at least according to a couple of pundits and one person in our power rankings had them pegged as the worst team in the region. So how much do you think we can read into, or maybe mitigate how good Avant looked or how bad the Chiefs looked relative to the quality of competition they were playing?
I think you definitely have to leave quite a bit of room for mitigation, especially when we start to consider like isolated matchups, where we're seeing Swiper versus Pabu. In the past, we've obviously seen Swiper quite handedly win that matchup. We are seeing Ryoma versus Frey. I think Ryoma's probably one of our premier mid laners in the region, without a doubt. Although, it's interesting to point out that he's going against the meta in a sense and playing Cassiopeia and Talia, as opposed to Azir, Malzahar, Zoe, and, what's the other champion? Ryze. Which is quite interesting, especially when you consider AV also pulled out an Orianna, so that's also a little bit against the flow. So it could be interesting to see what picks would come out in the mid lane. Obviously, both having been known as assassin players in the past. Don't think we'll see the assassins, but...
What was the other champion that Frey played? Oh my god, this website's broken. There we go.
Ooh, Frey.
Yeah, I want to say it was... Was it Azir? Oh no, it was Ryze.
Ryze.
So the reason I said I was standing confidently on a house of cards is that I think if you go down the roster, the only matchup that's close is only versus Babip. With a caveat. So only versus Babip is obviously like only has way more experience comparatively speaking to Babip. Babip has one match, only has a split in the bit. Pretty close to 2 splits considering the old Tainted Minds roster fell apart, was it like 4 or 5 weeks into the season, so he's got 1 full split, half of split 1 last year and 1 match this split, so he's nearly got a full year of competitive experience, as disjointed as that may be. So that one matchup I think is going to be pretty close. I think on paper top lane should be Swiper favoured, mid lane should be Roma favoured, and both bot lane members I think are better. Chiefs have better players, but arguably you could make a point that bot lane 2v2 matters, and that the familiarity with the 2v2 is going to be favoured with the experienced pair. And we saw a little bit of that in the Direwolf series, with Destiny having to do a little bit of the heavy lifting in lane, despite Fantix's obviously mechanical ability. I'm assuming that Fantix is still playing. There's no information or reason to suggest that he's not playing again this week. So when you look at it like that, and you talk, there's no doubt that Avant played a very strong macro game in week 1. I didn't think the Chiefs were terrible from a macro perspective. I think Chiefs' problems were more from individual players getting picked at really inopportune times. In their matchup against Direwolves, Roma did it in both losses in like really blatant circumstances that made his overall performance look worse than what I think it actually was. And Swiper obviously had a couple of moments, shall we say, in game 3. So the point I'm laboriously trying to get to is that I think Chiefs, like on paper, when I look at these rosters top to bottom, I don't see how Chiefs lose this match.
I do not think that Chiefs will lose this match, certainly. However, I'm a little hesitant to say if I want to go with 2-1 to Chiefs or 2-0. My heart wants to say 2-1, obviously, having worked with AV in the past, but the brain is definitely saying 2-0, considering all the factors that we've just spoken about. What are you thinking, Roos?
My pick is 2-1 to Chiefs. The one thing I think that is the wild card, so to speak, in this is the impact of the impact of the coaching related competitive rulings. Now, obviously, only Avant's coach Charlie has an actual competitive ruling, and I think we saw pretty. I mean, obviously they've got complete editorial control of what they release, but I think we saw in AV Life, I'm not sure if you caught it, that the job that Charlie's doing is not. Obviously, it'd be better if he's there, but it's not a huge deal that he's not. They do a lot of prep work beforehand, I know that, and we obviously saw the prep work that they were doing between games. While Charlie can influence matters, on the reverse side of that, the competitive rulings has meant that Chiefs' coach has become a player. So while he does get to be there during pick ban, unlike Avant's coach, he also has. I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse that your coach is in the game with you, because you have the person who's been looking at the match from an analytical standpoint, not just trying to play the best League of Legends you can. So that's one advantage. But on the other hand, how much coaching can you really bring to a team when you're trying to lane, particularly on an intensive on a laning intensive role like AD carry? Like it's a role well suited to shot calling team fights, because you're in a great position to have target priority and target selection. But so point I'm trying to get to is, do you think that the impacts, the couple of impacts on both sides of these coaching rulings is particularly favourable to either one of these teams?
If it's favourable for anyone, I would definitely say it's more favoured towards AV. Obviously, that is more due to the fact that while Charlie is obviously suspended from being able to go on stage, he is obviously available backstage, and he has definitely drilled all his players, and he's definitely drilled Brucey into what their roles are on stage. On that note, I just want to give a shout out to Brucey, one of the best blokes you'll meet, and I think he did a really good job on stage last week.
Yeah, he had some. I mean, you could kind of tell. I mean, this sounds like criticism, but I don't really mean it as such. Like, you could kind of tell that he just had three or four key points he was just repeating over and over again. There was one of them where I thought that it was blatantly the wrong thing, and he was just saying it to remind people, but I forget which one it was. I'd have to rewatch AV Live to have it. But yeah, having said all that, he was you could tell he was a calming presence on the team, and yeah, as you say, he's a fantastic bloke, and there's not too many people in the Oceanic scene that I have as much admiration for that I do for Brucey, for someone that I've never met. So really good, as I said on Twitter during the weekend, I think it was really good to see him on stage getting a bit of recognition from the casters as well.
Definitely agree. Obviously, I'd worked for AV in the past. I've dealt with Brucey personally. Can't go past a better bloke. Well, now going off of that point, we're looking at Fantix and what his role is for Direwolves as a coach and as a player. For Chiefs. It's going to take a little while to get over that. Yeah, obviously, long-time Direwolves player. But I think it's really interesting when you're a player and you're a coach at the same time, because while in draft you may be dealing with the same things, so you might be running down a checklist that being like, okay, we need to do this, we play to our win conditions, make sure X doesn't happen, if they do X we do this, etc. But also when you're in the draft phase itself, because as a coach it's a really awkward position, because you have to kind of be able to separate your own thoughts from what the overall team's perspective is. So, for example, you might want to play a particular champion. Let's just list Cogmore, for example. But Cogmore doesn't really fit into the team composition. But you're confident in your Cogmore, and it can create a really awkward dynamic because of this. And also, obviously, when you get in game, he's on a very mechanically intensive role, and as a coach you're not looking at in-game. Obviously Fantix is an excellent player, obviously hit rank 1, so he knows what he's doing, but you can't do the same job as a coach and as a player, because obviously a coach has no say in what happens in-game, except for what they have little control of in Champion Select.
So you think the overall maybe the fact that the coach has called into play the split focus of during the week that he's got to work on a game plan and on his own mechanical ability in what is an off roll for him. I think that's probably going to be, so if any, as you say, if the coaching scenario is going to be an advantage to anyone, it would be Avant for those reasons.
Certainly. I think it's quite heavily in Avant's favour.
So we'll just probably get towards the wrap up here. There's one last point I wanted to sort of talk about, and really the only. Oh, sorry. One thing I forgot to ask you. What was your pick for the Chiefs? You said you were flipping up between 2-0 and 2-1 to the Chiefs if you come to a decision.
I will go with 2-1.
2-1 to the Chiefs.
2-1 to the Chiefs.
Okay, and just so I'm going to quickly rip through. Don't need to cover these games at all because I think they're going to be they might be a little bit stompy. I dare say. Sunday's games is what I'm referring to here. I've got pretty convincing 2-0s for both Legacy. Sorry, not Legacy. I'm looking at week 1. I think Legacy's still what I'm trying to say though. Perth Internet. Hello. Yeah, Sunday's games here. So Legacy over Tectonic and Direwolves over Sin. Any disagreement? Anything you wanted to quickly bring up? Nothing particularly interesting jumping out here for me.
I don't think there's anything too interesting to jump out, unless Tectonic obviously come out with some interesting pocket picks like they did last week and potentially get an upset victory. I I definitely don't think they'll take the series, but there is potential for them to pick up one game.
Maybe steal one off the. What do you think? Maybe some top half of the map. Maybe Claire gets first blooded again, and Paprise rolls over series, or Paprise sways roll over series to Sybil, maybe something like that. Probably the only way I really see that happening. I don't see the bottom half of the map challenging Raid, who was on fire last week.
No, it would definitely have to happen on the top side, and it will probably have to happen due to some circumstance where they're picking a sort of weird pick, such as the Urgot. Otherwise, okay, so I think they've obviously probably had to prepare some pocket picks. Obviously, being a young roster and obviously developing. So if they want a victory, they'll probably resort to pocket picks, but otherwise I have this 2-0.
So I actually think that the match I'm getting to here, so we've just covered Sunday off quickly. The first match of the week before the first match of the week before the actual match of the week is Order vs Bombers, and while I expect a pretty convincing 2-0, there is a really interesting some really interesting elements to this match. Specifically, Order Bombers. This match is. I don't remember if I just said that. We've got Tiger, who we talked about, who played really well in week 1, going up against FBI, who also played really well. Not probably, I would say definitely both of their team's best player from last week. The other thing that's interesting to me about this matchup is that we've got the old rivals going back at it, Swiffer versus Choo Choo's in the mid lane. What do you think about those two matchups, specifically mid and AD carry, and is there anything else that's jumping out to you about this match?
So obviously we already spoke about it. Tiger will have the chance to really prove himself in this match against FBI and Rogue. Great opportunity for him. Also a great opportunity for FBI and Rogue to obviously maybe knock his confidence a little bit. But I think it's quite interesting seeing old rivals in Swiffer and Choo Choo's returning to the Rift once again. Choo Choo's has actually been doing quite well in the solo queue. I believe he's in the top 10 currently.
Yeah, I thought I saw that. I just closed my solo queue leaderboard page I was looking at before the stream started, so I'll just bring that up real quick. Didn't really get much of a chance to bring that to light last week. I thought he was a bit lackluster. I've been watching him a bit, you know, on his stream and in solo queue, and you're at his 8th as we speak. And I was expecting, to be honest, I was expecting more than he showed last week.
I definitely agree. I think Choo Choo's definitely had a little bit of a lackluster week. I think something interesting for Choo Choo's is that he's kind of been a little bit lackluster to the analysts and the more insider OS community, because when he came onto the scene, he was regarded as like the upcoming player, and he established that with that legacy going to wildcards, I believe it was.
Yeah, wildcard qualifiers in 2014, I believe.
And then he had a good year in the OPL in 2015, and then after that he seemed to kind of stagnate, which has been unfortunate. Obviously, Choo Choo's had been doing university and school full time.
Yeah.
So obviously you got to factor that into the case. And also have to factor in that he's just come back to the OPL. He's obviously taken a break since the dramas with Tainted Minds. I believe he did come back for a game last year for Legacy.
2 games.
Two games.
Covered Claire's suspension against the Chiefs, I want to say? No, it was after they played Chiefs. Oh, that's right. They played Direwolves and Sin, which are 2 pretty rough matches to come in for, and I believe they lost them both.
But I think the thing with Choo Choo's is you kind of know what your baseline is. You kind of know what to expect.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to have any standout performance against Swiffer. I think he's going to be a stable presence in the mid lane. Won't do anything too flashy, but he won't lose you the game either. I think that's exactly what you want out of your substitute.
Completely agreed. The one thing I would say, I guess, a little bit pushing back against how he'll do against Swiffer is that I thought Swiffer was not great last week. I mean, it's a bit hard to judge him too much because he everyone's going to remember the standout thing, which was the Urgot pick, and Tectonic specifically identified that was a position they were trying to set up by counterpicking the Rise. Maybe Order sort of set themselves up for that by penta banning Shock, but Shock still did really well. Like I said, to be fair, it was a counter pick. That's what you want out of your counter pick. But the other thing as well is that he got Zoe in game 1 into Shock's, I think it was the Zero if memory serves, and he did not smash that lane. Like he got an early kill on, I think it was the jungler, and then sort of used that to push around Shock from a kill pressure perspective, but didn't really demolish him from a farm standpoint, which is what you'd kind of expect out of a pick like Zoe. So I'm not here to tell you that Swift's washed up or that he was terrible or anything, but in the circumstances that he was in, I kind of expected him to do a lot better against Shock, who I've had to eat a little bit of humble pie about. I had him pegged as probably the worst player in the OPL, considering that the rookies were sight unseen, and I thought he acquitted himself very well against a legend of the scene in Swiffer.
I definitely agree, but I think you also have to consider that obviously Shock was on the Azir. Azir being, in my opinion, by far and above the #1 mid laner currently in the meta.
Over Zoe?
Definitely over Zoe. I think Zoe brings a dynamic that punishes people that are out of position, and I think whereas you look at Azir, and Azir's more stable, he brings very strong team fight, he brings strong laning phase, he brings them engaged, he can even have presence through his mobility. So through all that, I think Azir's just more stable. Zoe has a little bit more variance in the pick. Obviously she does a lot of damage, don't get me wrong, she just has a little bit more variance, and that's kind of why you'll see Azir picked more so than Zoe.
Fair enough. Well, I think that's probably about all I wanted to talk about that match. I'll just quickly we just covered it off, like I covered the match off, and I said at the beginning I expect a pretty convincing 2-0 for Order over the Bombers. Are you seeing anything different? Are you seeing Bombers picking up a game or possibly even in the match?
Unfortunately, without their full roster, I don't see Bombers taking a single game. At all. If they bring out cheese picks, I still don't see it happening. I think Order just take this straight 2-0.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, that's about all I wanted to cover off about the matches. We've given our quick runs through predictions for everything that you'd expect to see, flashing forward into tomorrow's games. So tomorrow? Today's Friday, right?
Today is Friday. Australia days put us a little bit off kilter.
Yeah, and I was off the 9 to 5 yesterday, so I've already lost all track of the days. So yeah, that's all we have for today on the Friday Flash Forward. Callum, is there anything you wanted to close with?
I believe we have covered everything. I don't think there's anything too much I need to say, except definitely watch the Chiefs AV game. That will definitely be an interesting series. Besides that, I'll be back next week, hopefully.
That we will, and so yeah, that's all we have time for today on the Friday Flash Forward. Catch Callum on Twitter at CDMLOL, myself at LOLTIES. You can catch all of Snowball's releases on either our Twitter feed, which is Snowball Esports, website, which is snowballesports.com. You can also find us on Facebook and YouTube. Do check us out on both of those places. So until then, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.